Before we begin, let me introduce my co-panelists. On my far left is Cathrine Kramer. She works internationally as an artist and curator. She's the co-founder of two artist think tanks, the Center of Genomic Gastronomy and Co-Climate. In 2014, she received a V-Day Art and Artificial Life International Award for her work as the Center for Genomic Gastronomy. She's also a recipient of Norwegian Art Council's stipend for young artists. She has lectured at numerous academic institutions around the world and holds degrees from Royal College of Art, London, and the University of Technology, Sydney. Cathrine works at the intersections of art and science with a focus on the ecological, cultural, and ethical dimensions of life on spaceship Earth. Next to her is my dear colleague Kevin Liggieri. He studied German language and literature as well. Thank you. At the Universität Bochum, in summer 2013, he received his Master of Arts. His PhD project is about human techne on the genesis and modification of anthropotechnics. He looks into the history of technical, biological, and philosophical visions of human optimizing. Directly next to me is Dr. Markus Tillmann. He's lecturer at the Universität Bochum, where he teaches German literature. He examines trends in posthumanism in literature and film, the relationship between popular culture and literature. He also works as journalist and scientific author. So, our panel topic is the posthuman threshold, or on the possibility of conceiving one's own end. Well, we will look at some structures and some discourses which negate traditional concepts of human, in particular the special status of man as the measure of all things. We will try to imagine a world without human and ask how can philosophy think the posthuman as threshold, how can literature put it in words, and how can media art express this topic. So I will begin with my talk and then we go directly in this order, actually. Great. So I begin. My topic is horror, posthuman threshold, and world without us. You want to so you can actually look at my presentation. So I start by quoting media scholar Eugene Thacker. Scientists estimate that approximately 90% of the cells in the human body belong to non-human organisms, bacteria, fungi, and a whole bestiary of other organisms. Why shouldn't this also be the case for human thought as well? Well, can thought go on without a body? Asked philosopher Jean-François Lyotard once in a cinema at the University of Siegen. Considering this quotation, the media scholar Eugene Thacker is even more radical. He asks, can thought be human at all? Today I want to talk what's in between these two statements. The issue I want to discuss is the following. Why are we trespassing? What are we trespassing by answering these questions? To put it briefly, it's a specific kind of boundary or limitation. Something I want to name a posthuman threshold. I understand it as a kind of tipping point, what is imaginable for us as humans, and what seems to be in the dark clouds of the unknown, something that is still unreachable and uncanny. What could be behind this entitled posthuman threshold, our shared panel topic? We, my co-panelists, and I wanted to suggest some approaches, what this could be. I want to give some thought what it could be in the worst case of all. In the worst case of all, it is a gate to extinction and to a world without us. My topic today, I admit it seems a bit sinister for a Sunday morning, but I want to talk about nothing else than this horrifying idea of a world without, I want to talk about nothing else than this horrifying idea of a world in which everything that is actually human is extinct. But don't be afraid, I just present you some weird or maybe not so weird speculations. So it could be possible that you propose some questions now. So actually, what is he doing? Why is he doing that? Wouldn't it be more suitable or even straightforward to talk about the beginning of a new world instead about the end of one? Furthermore, if one talks about an end, it is always indirectly a talk about a beginning. All in all, it's a methodical question I have to answer. It is philosophically impossible to think about an end at all without understanding this end as a limitation. Beg your pardon. But you have to take into account that you have to be able to think both sides of this limitation or threshold to define that end. It's this kind of dialectic of limitation. Hegel calls it the dialectic der Grenze. So you have to be able to anticipate what's on the other side of this limitation, this posthuman veil, this threshold, I want to call it. On the first side of this limitation of human thought, we can find the world of our all-day routine, which we can perceive or which we can walk through it and so on. This world can be named as the world for us. The world of phenomena, die Welt der Phänomene, Kant called it, die Welt der Erscheinungen. On the second side, speculatively, we have this new world we can hardly imagine. A world, space, or environment in which exists no difference between nature and artificiality, between human and non-human, and intelligence is no longer a human privilege at all. Our searched threshold appears to be some kind of curtain or veil between this perceivable world for us and the unthinkable other side. Let's call this one, this unthinkable side, the world without us. My approach to this assumption is driven by following questions. Does thought always have to be connected to vivid entities? Is this non-human space actually thinkable? How can we get closer to this world without us? One way to get closer to it is to accelerate and anticipate this specific horror of human extinction or human obsolescence as well. So in the world without us, this is my approach to it, the strongest topics of horror, we actually all know by countless horror movies and literature and all that stuff, are not only possible in this world, they're actually happening. So let me show you some motives of horror. First, things moving by themselves. Second, something that should be dead, or even someone that should be dead, is actually very alive. Classical examples for these topics you can find in movies like Tobe Hooper's Poltergeist. So the storyline is a young family are visited by ghosts in their home. At first, this ghost appears friendly, moving objects around the house to the amusement of everyone. Then they turn nasty and start to terrorize the family before they kidnap the youngest daughter. So in this movie, actually, chairs are moving autonomously from one kitchen side to the other. Children's toys become actually very alive. And in a very famous scene, a television, as you can see, is mediating more than it should. This classical example that a medium is actually more mediating than it should, you can often find in movies and literature which are dealing with a motive of unthinkability. For example, from the demonic videotapes in The Ring, for instance, to the series Stranger Things, to literary examples from E.T. Hoffmann's Der Sandmann, The Sandman, to Algernon Blackwood's The Empty House, or even Stephen King's novels Cell, for example. Eugene Thacker summarized this fact of what he calls dark media, or I would suggest to call it some kind like a dark media ontology or something. He summarized it as follows. In such moments, it is less the media object, which is the source of horror, and more the fact of mediation itself, which is horrific, a mediation that strangely seems to work all too well. In a world where all these horrific things are possible, mankind is no longer in charge. The space on this hidden sign behind our posthuman threshold seems to be indeed a world without us. Probably you already suspect that I'm not talking about some horrifying faraway future or some unthinkable, just speculative mind game. The posthuman world without us is already here. So let me rephrase what I told you about motives of horror a moment ago. First, things are moving by themselves. Self-driving cars are no longer science fiction, for instance. Second, things that should be dead are actually very alive. There is a blurring of life and death. Even the status of things has changed. Things became actors and actants, and considering Donna Haraway or Bruno Latour, we are all some kind of hybrids or cyborgs. Third, my special favorite, media are mediating more than they normally should. I just point some keywords here: Internet of Things, digital surveillance, ubiquitous computing, big data. The world without us finally has become the world for us. Or like horror novelist Thomas Liggieri dramatically puts it in a nutshell, while nightmares are the most convenient reference point for this sense of the impossible, the unthinkable as something that is actually happening, it is not restricted to our sleeping hours. This quotation out of Liggieri's short story, The Shadow at the Bottom of the World, asserts what can be described as an environmental process, or which Erich Hörl named it as technological condition. I will explain it in a moment, but first I want to give an insight to the pessimistic perspective of Liggieri. Liggieri's stories are in many ways more philosophical and even didactic as just to be some Lovecraftian pulp or weird fiction. In his philosophical non-fiction book, Conspiracy Against the Human Race, a pessimistic Schopenhauer-like manifesto of nihilism, which was influential on the pessimistic perspective of the first season of True Detective, by the way. Liggieri shapes what's happening to a human perspective in a non-human world, and I quote it, "With eyes that see through a translucent veil shimmering before us, we look at life from the other side. There, something escorts us through our days and nights, like a second shadow that casts itself into another world and fastens us to it." This non-human actant, which seem not only to escort us, it seems to be ubiquitous and also horrifically walked right out of our unconscious. This non-human is, of course, you all know it already, it is technology. Taking technology into account as the main factor of the so-called world without us, we can also give this world a different name. The world without us is the technocene. And I refer to Erich Hörl, to Erich again, because he pointed out that the term Anthropocene, which you all also could have think of, is misleading in a way, because it gives too much credit to human, it gives the human too much attention. And so I want to point the human aside, and I want to talk about the technocene. Second part, I start with a quotation again, Eugene Secker again. "In any given moment of mediation, there is always a minimal separation, a differential, a gap, lacuna or fissure, a blind spot. This blind spot of mediation relates the most to this entitled Posthuman Threshold. Many typical motives you find in horror stories and movies anticipate not only our fears, but also essential elements of technological development, or like Erich Hörl sharpened it, and I quote him, "Under the technological condition, people exist in a broadband world in which they are permanently connected to and embedded in diverse objects that communicate and operate automatically, and by now, for the most part, even bypass subjects altogether. In summary, it can be said that the elements of horror are my approach to this posthuman threshold, because horror and the world without us share a specific condition. They both are connected to the encapsulated thought of unthinkability, and both indicate some shift of technological or technical things. This specific kind of horror I'm interested in appears as suitable gateway for reflecting mediation and also for destroying anthropocentric illusions. I think it is similar to Heidegger's reflection about existing through existential anxiety, existential angst. Thinking about the edges of man is more and more technological and no longer a philosophical problem. Therefore, our most challenging project to think about our technological condition is in this way an essential topic for art and literature, because man cannot easily accept the non-human trespassing of specific anthropologic limitations. May this trespassing be self-induced, accidental, or even long desired, the human vanishing line in front of our challenge of thinking, or task of thinking, Aufgabe des Denkens, as Heidegger mentioned it, is still vast, and it manifests itself in art and literature and film. Nevertheless, I think art and film can be still the media to illuminate these blind spots of the world without us and tear holes in the curtain of unthinkability. As Felix Guattari suggests in Chaosmosis, the aesthetic paradigm, the polyphonic and heterogenic perspective of art, is a leverage point to diversify the homogenesis of techno-capitalism. Following this vision of thinking art manifests a trigger to let the Anthropocene, the world without us, become tangible. Thank you.
Okay, let us switch from horror films, weird fiction, to science fiction. Thanks Fabian, thanks Klaas, stagehand, PowerPoint visit, for organizing this conference and inviting us. I would talk about science fiction, about modern science fiction, and especially about how science fiction literature describes virtual reality and software entities, especially in Greg Egan's novel Permutation City. How can we think about mind clones, self-aware software, and cyber consciousness? A continuum of software-based human-level autonomy and empathy, for example. Or like Hans Moravec notes in his 1988 book, Mind Children, The Future of Robot and Human Intelligence, a post-biological world dominated by self-improving thinking machines would be as different from our own world of living things as this world is different from the lifeless chemistry that preceded. A population consisting of unfettered mind children is quite unimaginable. What would it be? What would it be life is one day human mankind, if one day human mankind would not longer exist and a population consisting of mind children arises instead? Is this option not getting more and more plausible with each passing day? And what access do we have to our own non-existence? What access do we have to post-human life, to a future when human biology is no longer forms a part of life? Considering these questions, it seems worthwhile to take a more detailed look into modern science fiction literature, concerning the fact that science fiction literature is densely populated with robots and cyborgs, but also with software entities. In my talk, I want to present some typical motives, how science fiction is dealing with and anticipates the challenges of technology. Greg Egan, 1995 novel Permutation City, for example. But before I talk about Greg Egan's novel, let me first say a few words about science fiction literature in general and its specific relationship to technological progress. Science fiction literature creates a special strato between fiction on the one hand and science on the other hand. Accordingly, the science fiction author Brian Aldiss writes, science fiction is a fiction of a technological age. More than any other literature genre, science fiction literature is a seismograph for technological progress. That means the following. On the one hand, the science fiction describes technological developments, which are contemporarily impossible yet. Moreover, science fiction shows in detail the political, cultural, and social impact which technological progress may have. Science fiction literature produces their potential by raising a number of questions. How far should we push technology? What are the social, cultural, and political consequences? Science fiction literature creates a narrative space that binds the impact of technological developments on the individual fate of human beings. Due to their dystopian and utopian potential, science fiction literature creates a special space of imagination and illustrates the impact which technological developments can have. In an interview with the science fiction magazine Locus, the science fiction author Greg Bear explains, in broad terms, science fiction and science has always danced around each other. Science fiction is the subconscious of science. And the science fiction author Brian Aldiss describes science fiction as a search for a definition of man and a status in the universe which will stand in our advanced but confused state of knowledge, science. In the 1980s, the so-called cyberpunk literature has opened the virtual space as a new space of imagination. Brain scanning, the possibility of complete immersion in digital worlds are the specific motives of the cyberpunk literature, for example. The cyber in cyberpunk refers on science in particular. The cyber in cyberpunk refers to science and in particular to the revolutionary redefinition of the relationship between humans and machines, brought about by the science of cybernetics. The punk in cyberpunk refers to the subcultural movement to subversion and anarchism. Like the science fiction author Bruce Sterling wrote, and suddenly a new alliance is becoming evident, an integration of technology and the 80s counterculture, an unholy alliance of the technical world of organized dissent, the underground world of pop culture, visionary fluidity, and street-level anarchy. But the idea of computer-simulated reality can really be traced back Es fehlt ein ganzes Ende, Entschuldigung, ist wirklich was weg. But the idea of computer-simulated reality can really be traced back to experimental science fiction works like Stanley G. Weinbaum's short story Pygmalion's Spectacles. In Weinbaum's 1935 short story, an elfin professor invents a pair of goggles to a young man. The spectacles function as a movie that gives one sight and sound, taste, smell, and touch. To a young man, the professor said, "You are in the story. You speak to the shadows, characters, and they reply. And instead of being on a screen, the story is all about you, and you are in it." The pair of goggles lets the wearer experience a fictional world through holographics, smell, taste, and touch. In the 1980s, the concept of virtual reality has been taken up and developed by many cyberpunk authors, for example, William Gibson's novel Neuromancer. In cyberpunk literature, you also find the possibility of mind uploading, interfaces between human and machines, the hacker character, artificial intelligence, multinational companies, and so on and so on. The cyberpunk literature is marked by a post-apocalyptic aesthetic. The world of cyberpunk literature is bleak, violent, and pessimistic. Multinational concerns, dictatorial regimes, and artificial intelligence dominate the world. The society is divided into high-tech winners and high-tech losers. In post-biological layers, for example, artificial intelligence, and marginalized layers, for example, hackers, drug addicts, and prostitutes. In the world of cyberpunk, the cultural evolution is determined by machines. The human being is genetically replaced by artificial intelligence, and the individuality is lost. Cyberpunk literature presents visions of the future based on the extensive application of the idea of cyberspace, a term that appeared in William Gibson's 1984 novel Neuromancer. It's a story about a computer cowboy named Case, who is an illicit operator in the net. At the beginning of the novel, Case has a damaged nervous system, so he cannot slip into the cyberspace. Gibson wrote, Case was 24. At 22, he'd been a cowboy, a rustler, one of the best in the sprawl. He'd operated on an almost permanent adrenaline high, a byproduct of use and proficiency, jacked into a custom cyberspace deck that projected his disembodied consciousness into the consensual hallucination that was the Matrix. A thief, he'd worked for others, wealthier thieves, employers who provided the exotic software required to penetrate the bright walls of corporate systems, opening windows into rich fields of data. He'd make the classical mistake. He stole from his employers, that damaged his nervous system with a wartime Russian mycotoxin strapped to a bed in a Memphis hotel, his talent burning out micron by micron. He hallucinated for 30 hours. For Case, who'd lived for the bodiless exaltation of cyberspace, it was the fall. The body was meat. Case fell into the prison of his own flesh. Biotechnology plays a crucial role in Neuromancer. Flesh can be wet grown and any organ can be lifted out of the body and replaced with a brand new one. A huge black market network incessantly trades body parts and genetic material, and surgery can enhance the body's power in countless ways. Molly, one of the main characters, has mirror shades implants over her eyes, which allows her to see in the dark, as well as laser retractable blades inserted under each of her fingernails. However, the focus of Gibson's novel is a virtual reality, the cyberspace. Gibson describes the cyberspace as a consensual hallucination experienced daily by billions of legitimate operators in every nation, by children being taught mathematical concepts, a graphic representation of data abstracted from the bank of every computer in the human system. Unthinkable complexity, lines of light ranged in the non-space of the mind clusters and constellation of data. The virtual reality Gibson designs here is a time and placeless space, a complex hallucination. People are leaving their bodies behind, slipping from the meat space into the virtual world, and drifting and floating through this non-space. In Gibson's novel Neuromancer, the central nervous system of human beings is directly connected to the computer to project the disembodied consciousness into the cyberspace. The Australian science fiction author Greg Egan was exploring the idea of digital bodies in his 1994 novel, 10 years later as Gibson, Permutation City. His goal was to take digital existence and conscious software absolutely seriously and push the logical consequences as far as possible. Most important among the novel is a consistent questioning of human subjectivity, identity, and embodiment in the face of new biomedical and technological advantages. Permutation City focuses in large part on the nature of life and intelligence in posthuman context. For example, Egan's novel Permutation City begins with the story of the character Paul Durham, or better, the narrative of Permutation City begins with two different incarnations of Paul Durham. One is a biological Paul Durham, a flesh and blood human, while the other is an informatic copy. The flesh and blood Durham is obsessed with copies and is attempting to investigate them using himself, or rather his copy, as test subject. When the copy initially awakes, he is immediately overwhelmed by two feelings. The first one is a realization that he is not longer Paul Durham, despite possessing all of his memories, and the second one is a deep, abiding sense of lack due to the absence of the material world, of the essence of the meat world. Indeed, the loss of the material world is too hard for the copy, and he immediately attempts to commit digital suicide. However, the copy story does not end at this point. During his suicide attempt, the copy discovers that Durham, his biological template, has removed the self-termination software. Through the character Durham and his two incarnations, a lot of questioning about copies arises. What does it mean to live completely in virtual reality? Do virtual existences feel suffer, pain, love, loss, desire, boredom, curiosity? Even if copies are intelligent, does the reinscription digitally of their mental pattern actually involve recreation of that person or the creation of something altogether new and different? To sum it up, can a person be reduced to a binary pattern? Years later, in 2050, the flesh and blood Paul Durham offers wealthy copies prime real estate in an advanced supercomputer, which will never be shut down and never experience any slowdown. Durham seems to be driven by a morbid and irrational impulse. He wants not only to create digital life, he wants to create a completely separate digital universe for copies. During the construction of this digital heaven, Durham employs software developer Marie De Luca to design an autoverse program which, given a powerful enough computer, could generate autoverse life. The autoverse is an artificial life simulator based on a cellular automaton, complex enough to represent the substratum of an artificial biochemistry. The autoverse is similar enough to the material world to support a rich biochemistry, but it is different enough to act in unexpected ways. Indeed, the autoverse is to chemistry what the contemporary computer game The Sims is to suburban life. Durham commissions Marie to create a seed for a biosphere, that is, an outline for a complete autoverse planet with a single organism which, given time and computing resources, could evolve into various intelligent life forms. Durham explains how he is creating an informatic Garden of Eden, a beginning point for his closed, self-reliant digital university. 7 millennia after the Garden of Eden configuration is successfully deployed, the copy's highly populated digital universe is thriving. The central attraction is Planet Lambert, a complete autoverse world grown from Marie's biosphere seed, which copies can observe but with which they cannot yet interact. Intelligent life has arisen on planet Lambert in the form of complex swarms of insect-like beings. When the Lambertians unexpectedly develop a stable ontology explaining their world without need for creators, their system and physical laws ripple outwards, engulfing the copies surrounding digital world, forcing the copies to flee. The novel Permutation City shows that Egan believes that human consciousness will arise in software. Egan describes a future in which we will be able to access information in our brains which constitute our memories, skills, and personalities and back them up. Egan is a materialist who believes that consciousness emerges as patterns from myriad connections among information stored either as chemical states in brain neurons or voltage states in computer chips. He believes that minds arise in and owing to any suitable complex computing substrate. Egan's novel Permutation City shows that the shift from material to digital context may hold potential for radical questioning of identity and existing social and cultural structures. But Egan also shows that the shift in itself does not necessitate such inquiries. Indeed, the epistemological uncertainty of subjectivity considering the virtual may not lead to a radical break with existing structures of knowledge and power at all. Even if we do not agree with Egan's materialistic view, Permutation City is an exciting thought experiment, Gedankenexperiment. Thank you for your kind attention.
And now, standing here like a preach, first I want to give you a quote from the Transhumanism Bible. Julian Huxley's New Bottles for New Wine, 1957. Huxley quotes, "The human species can, if it wishes, transcend itself. Not just sporadically, an individual here in one way, an individual there in another way, but in its entirety as humanity. We need a name for this new belief. Perhaps, and this is the first time in the biotechnological discourse where this term appears, perhaps transhumanism will serve. Man remaining man, but transcending himself, but by realizing new possibilities of and for his human nature." But I'm not talking about Huxley. This would be another term. I'm talking about some kind of a dawn of transhumanism in Russian thought. After the nice and very good presentation of transhumanism in science fiction and pop culture by Felix Hüttemann and Markus Tillmann, I will show you in my talk some kind of real bodily biotechnological ideas of transhumanistic transformation, which belongs to the Soviet genetics in the 1920s. So I will show you something from the historical point of view. The period between 1900 and 1930 revealed in Russia a practical manifestation of the self-technologies, which saw the body not only in a poetic, symbolical way, but really practically as a material of shaping and rebuilding. Beside experiments of blood transfusion by Bogdanov, which also, like Markus also said, was not only a scientist but also a literature writer, and machinization of bodies by Gastev, we heard this yesterday from Andreas Borgmann, it is difficult to make a clear transition between the theoretical utopian vision of new man, this was the term, and the eugenic practical breeding in the Russian discourse. As there are many hybrid networks between science, art, and politics which interact with one another to stimulate and produce knowledge. I'm sorry, my PowerPoint isn't so fancy, but I have some nice pictures. The Russian discourse, especially in the transhumanistic vision of a new man, was on the one hand influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, so Nietzsche was very early translated in the Russian discourse, and on the other hand by the experimental methods, for example, from biologists like Ivanov, I will tell you a little bit later about him, and Hermann J. Muller, the famous geneticist. The Russian idea of a social practice of producing man was powerful in Russia. Therefore, the utopia of social progress was biologized and materialized. There you see some of the big Bolshevik. In this biosocial discourse of a genetically perfected new man, Russian theorists of human breeding are looking back on the traditional parallels, and this is my point in my presentation, of animal and plant breeding, and showing clear transhumanism views. The most influential group of eugenics were the Russian biologists, especially the key players and the founders of the Russian genetic research, Nikolai Koltsov and his student Alexander Serebrovsky. There they are. On the left, Koltsov, on the right, Alexander Serebrovsky. These researchers are important because they no longer want to create just a utopian fiction of producing new, improved humankind, but they really executed experiments and applied science as far as they could do it until the Stalinism regime. So this isn't a world what I would show you without us, like Felix Hüttemann showed us today, but I will show you a world with a better us. Or they want to show you a world. I'm just showing you what they want to show you. This leads to the fact that man was interpreted by this movement as a primarily biological rather than a pure social being. And that's the same thing what modern transhumanism do. When Koltsov, this is the guy in the front sitting with his students, became fully aware of the importance of new Western work on genetics in 1980 and 1990, he quickly moved the field to the forefront in his plans, since breeding experiments were relatively cheap and easy to perform, especially the genetic research with Drosophila flies. In the picture there, you see standing there in black, I take one this, there in black in the front. This is Hermann, the famous US-American genetic researcher Hermann J. Muller, which was also a socialist and visited Russia a few times. And also you see Serebrovsky there looking at the Drosophila flies. In addition, genetics promised immediate practical benefit in animal breeding, and at a time of hunger crisis, this was very interesting also for Bolshevistic ideas. Koltsov's ideas participated on the traditional breeding thoughts and put plants, animals, and humans alike. 1920, Koltsov published his programmatical article, Improvement of the Human Race. In this article, he describes three key components of eugenics. The first, pure science, how he called it, or anthropogenetic, refers to the knowledge of human inheritance. This accumulation and acquisition of genetic knowledge is necessary for Koltsov. He searched for the inheritable properties of the blood and for anthropogenetic laws. The second, which he called applied science, mentioned by Koltsov, is a Anthropotechnica. Some of you might know this term from the philosopher Peter Sloterdijk, but he just take this term like 80 years later and doesn't refer to Koltsov or to Serebrovsky. But the term Anthropotechnica, this could also be a nice field, is much older. It's from the 1850s. And that's another talk. The central task of this Anthropotechnica is to find suitable methods to improve the genetic quality of future generations. For Koltsov, quote, the nature of any species of animal or plant, including humans, can be changed consciously through selection of such parents who can provide the most desirable combination of traits in the offspring, quote end. So for Koltsov, the genetic invention is clear when he writes, we have, so quote Koltsov again, we have become acquainted with the methods used by modern biologists to improve plant and animal breeds. The science of improvement of animal breeds is called zootechniques. The science of the improvement of human race, which is usually called eugenics, can be also called anthropotechniques because, and this is important, so also he analogises the two terms and he doesn't use eugenics like a Western term for him. Because anthropotechnics, he wrote, is no more than a subdiscipline of zootechniques, quote end. So Kolkov goes on. We could imagine conditions under which human nature could be improved through the same methods that the modern zootechnician used to improve domestic animal breeds, quote end. So man and animal are the same for these researchers, and man can be domesticated and breed like animals. This was a simple and genius plan. In characterization, eugenics, Koltsov initially took his lead ideas from Gordon, he's the so-called father of eugenics, and his concept of civic religion. And this is also a part which new or modern transhumanism also had or have. The civic religion, one that provided hope for a better future. So like I said, in modern transhumanism, optimization, Koltsov's idea are combined with a kind of seculary religion, a believing in godlike scientist. Also, Koltsov concluded in his third component of eugenic religion after anthropogenetic and anthropotechniques, eugenic, so quote, Koltsov has before it a high ideal, which also gives meaning to life and is worthy of sacrifices. The creation through conscious work by many generations of a human being of a higher type. So this is the goal, to create a human being of a higher type. A powerful, just again quote Koltsov, a powerful ruler of nature and creator of life. Eugenics is the religion of the future and, so Koltsov, it awaits its profits, quote end. So Koltsov's vision is clear and also near to Nietzsche's Übermensch. Like I said before, the new man who was built by anthropotechniques should have healthy instincts, a strong will, an inborn passion for life, love, and work, especially work. He should be physically healthy and harmoniously supplied with everything that makes his organism viable. I skipped one. Yeah. This new man, Koltsov emphasizes, a superman, homo creator, should indeed become the king of nature, subjugating it by the power of its reason and will. So individual, strong man, which also lead to a strong collective society. Man must become animal again. This is, of course, not a big problem when you believe in Darwinism, which the most Russian geneticists did. And of course, I think we all, and also radically, also the modern transhumanism. Serebrovsky, a very clever student of Koltsov and a board member of the Russian Eugenic Society, which was not so big, goes a step further in his human breeding ideas. Serebrovsky biologized social phenomena and was one of the first and most radical thinkers in Russian practical eugenics. In his article, Anthropogenetics and Eugenics in a Socialist Society, he described 1929, so like 7 years later, then Koltsov, but in analogy to Koltsov, his three methods of genetic acting. First, again, anthropogenetics, which should lead to a compilation of chromosomal diagram, which includes a structural scheme of the entire human hereditary apparatus, similar to what was done for certain small organisms, animals and plants in this time. Then the second category, geographical genetics, or how he called it, genogeography. For Serebrovsky, the task of human genogeography is to replace mere numbers of man and woman with a survey of the hereditary traits, which will result in finding the percentage of people who possess a certain inherited gene and how this percentage is geographically distributed over the entire country. So Zabłowski wants to present a clear picture of Soviet citizens from the genetic point of view. He wanted to make a gene card, a Google Street View for genes, to call it this way. The third category, analogy to cults of Anthropotechnica, is the Soviet eugenics. It would be too much to say how and why Zabłowski differs his Soviet eugenics from the Western eugenics, which has, quote Zabłowski, not achieved anything other than talk. This is what Zabłowski writes 1929. And this is totally different, of course, totally different eugenics like the German Rassenhygiene. But in the same tradition that we heard before, Zabłowski also practically analogizes animals and humans when he says that his theory, quote, based on the solid foundation of modern genetics, presenting brilliant examples of animal and plant selectionists who create life as they want it. So that's the same thing which Koltsov describes with his term of homo creator. So life creation is man creation with the methods of animal breeding. Zabłowski learned his anthropotechniques, his human breeding, from one of his teachers, the biologist and pioneer of artificial insemination, Ilya E. Ivanov. You see him here with a hybrid between a horse and a zebra called Equus hybrids. So he really did, in the early 1910s, he did hybrid experiments with animals. This is not so important, not so terrific. But he also, and this would be very interesting for another talk, he also tries to do this with man. So from 1926, let's just talk a little bit about Ivanov. From 1926 to 1927, Ivanov headed an expedition to West Africa with the purpose of attempting to hybridize different species of anthropoid apes by an artificial insemination. Although no results were published. But Ivanov really, you could read this in his textbooks, Ivanov really did hybrid experiments with human sperm and apes. So he wanted to hybrids like a human and an ape hybrid to make it stronger also. And he also, he wanted to do human sperm with apes, so male sperm with female apes, but he also wanted to do it with ape sperm and female humans, what he wanted to do back in Russia. The funny thing is really they found a woman who wanted to do this in Russia. Ivanov returned to the Moscow Zootechnical Institute in 1928, and this I think is an important thing. In the same year as Zabłowski moved his researchers to his new laboratory at that institute. So Ivanov's Zootechnica was certainly the inspiration for Zabłowski's Anthropotechnica. With Ivanov's method of artificial insemination, Zabłowski intended to establish the eugenic ideal, quote, not through the dreams of great minds, so no, not just theoretically, but through the hardship of life, quote, and. Like you see, and I just want to get you a little bit not so deep in the genetic research program, but in this discourse of transhumanism and breeding man like animals. So like you see, transhumanism was getting more and more practical. For Zabłowski, the solution, quote, of the problem of the organization of selection in man is through the introduction of artificial insemination by approved sperm. So the same thing what Ivanov did. His hope was that with using the excellent modern technique of artificial insemination, which means taking sperm from well-born male, a method which was, like I said, broadly applied only in horse and sheep husbandry, it is possible for Zabłowski to obtain from one outstanding and valuable breeder up to 1,000 or even 10,000 children, quote, and Under such condition, Cerbowski wrote in the same article, human selection will make giant leaps forward. These giant steps wanted to change human beings and breed them like animals. So I come to an end. Finally, it can be stated that the Russian reception of the concept and the idea of breeding man clearly illustrates how media and cultural technique require each other and how man and animal are defined together as an experimental object, so anthropology and zoology. And also the methods were interacting. What's the Russian movement of God builder? Just theoretical or literary aesthetic titled as Creating Life or Anthropotechniques went through various experimental transcription, also Ivanov and Mahler, and institutionally from Koltsov to finally Cerbowski's idea of practice of breeding man for biotechnological and of course political optimization. In this Soviet discourse, we could see one type of the dawn of modern human transhumanism. Thanks.
So my name is Cathrine Kramer, and I work primarily as an artist. But today I'm going to talk to you about an exhibition that I curated. But as a quick background, I spend most of my time working as part of the Center for Genomic Gastronomy, which, in light of the talk we just had, has even more, But it's an artist-led think tank that examines the biotechnologies and biodiversity of human food systems. And one thing we've been saying from the beginning is we've always been biohackers. And a central part of being human is part of the fact that we manipulate our environments, and in turn, our environments manipulate us. And this is very clearly demonstrated in the human food system. So regardless of your definition of natural, none of these organisms in this image, for example, remain unaffected by human desires or needs. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. But the main focus of this presentation is a show called Human Plus, which was an exhibition that I curated for CCCB in Barcelona. And it was open from October last year to April this year and received over 100,000 visitors. So it was very much like a popular, trying to ask interesting questions, but to a very general audience. And the research for the exhibition started by asking, what does it mean to be a human today, and how will this change in the future? So, Human Plus, The Future of Our Species, it was called, is an exhibition that explores potential future trajectories of humankind by considering the implications of both historical and emerging technologies. How do new technologies redefine human culture, and what novel ethical questions do they raise? And what are the futures we expect and desire? What will it feel like to be a human 100 years from now, if that even happens? 4 overarching themes for this were developed to create a framework for this exploration. So they were augmented abilities, encountering others, authoring environments, and life at the edges. And each theme was represented by artworks, historical artifacts, videos, scientific research, and commercial products. And there's always polemical, controversial discussions around human, if you want to call it optimization or change. And the reason for showing this range of different kinds of artifacts was also to show the complex and messy, often contradictory perspectives of within each of these themes. So today I was asked to present what strategies artists have used to provoke questions and discussions around what you want to potentially call posthumanism, or So, for example, can art with its special relation to materiality be one way to comprehend that space beyond man, if that is at all possible, was a question I was given. I'm not sure about this, but for the remainder of this talk, I'll pull out a few examples from each of the themes in the exhibition that I think demonstrate different strategies that artists use for imagining and embodying the imagined futures they desire or wish to critique. So you can check the gray box in the corner to see the strategy I think is employed for the different projects. So, from glasses to heart valves, we've always been cyborgs, curious about bodily form and function. Our abilities are augmented by technologies that extend our reach, capabilities, and lifetimes. From playful and celebratory projects to projects that challenge social norms and expectations, the theme Augmented Abilities focuses on the physical, chemical, and biological methods for augmenting the mind and body. So in Human Plus, a range of prosthetics were presented. The oldest examples were 2 prosthetic arms from the 16th century that demonstrate the long-standing history of replacing missing body parts and the craftsmanship involved. Already then, they were created with mechanical controlled movements in the wrists and fingers and were actually military responses to military things, which is also. But more contemporary are prototypes and material experiments from the Fab Lab low-cost prosthesis program, which are creating open source templates to make prosthetics affordable and easily accessible around the world. And there was also a showcase of prosthetics from the Alternative Limb Project, which creates highly aesthetic limbs. Rather than mimicking human body parts, the alternative limbs are customized wearable sculptures, you could say, experiments in form and function beyond the body's shape and capabilities. And finally, Amy Mullins also loaned CCCB one of her cheetah prosthetic legs that she wore in the '96 Atlanta Paralympics. And she's a vocal advocate for changing the perceptions of people with varying abilities. And her hope for the future is greater acceptance in society of people's individuality and difference. So that was part of the... So there are many prosthetics designed to replace or enhance body parts, but are humans sometimes in need of a prosthetic for missing empathy and emotions? Matt Kenyon's artwork, Improvised Empathetic Device, or IED, is a political and cultural provocation built in response to a lack of US media coverage about the human tragedy of the Iraq War and citizen apathy towards war. He designed a wearable device that pierces the wearer's arm with a needle every time an American soldier dies in Iraq. Bypassing the mainstream media, the device works from an automated feed and causes physical pain to elicit an emotional response. And I kind of wonder if you applied that currently to the migration crisis. In 2010, you would have gotten 10 pricks a day, which would be permanent scarring. Some artists go to great lengths to embody new perspectives, using their own bodies as canvases to experiment with their senses and altering perception. This is a long history, Stella Arkin. But Neil Harbison is an artist and self-proclaimed cyborg who has had an antenna embedded in his skull. Born colorblind, he wanted to find a way to perceive color, and the antenna transforms light frequencies to sound, allowing him to hear the spectrum of light, including invisible colors such as infrareds and ultraviolets. There are a number of existing implanted electronic devices, such as cochlear implants, but they're usually developed to fix a perceived problem rather than to completely transform perception beyond current human capabilities. And this is one of many projects that point to new and creative ways for humans to use technology to alter their lived experience, as opposed to, again, being driven by the military-industrial complex. Harbison's antenna is a physical electronic device that hangs over his head and has become an integral part of his organism and identity, so much so that he convinced the British authorities to allow his passport photo to include it. And Moon Ribas is a long-term collaborator of Harbison's, and together they've co-founded the Cyborg Foundation to encourage humans to become cyborgs, but Rebus has a sensor permanently attached to her elbow that's wirelessly connected to online seismographs and vibrates whenever there's an earthquake in the world. And it's often argued that technology is detaching us from our natural surroundings, but this is perhaps an example that shows how technology can enhance and create an intimate and embodied connection to natural phenomena. So humans are a social species, and the theme Encountering Others explores the ways technologies are mediating social exchanges and changing the ways we encounter others. Families, friends, pets, and increasingly robots and artificial intelligences. It also asks what role humans have in industrial processes where robots become more like humans and humans are expected to become more like robots. Whose Utopia is a film by artist Cao Fei that offers an intimate glimpse into the hopes and dreams of Chinese factory workers. Their daily lives are occupied with repetitive movements and mechanistic tasks, ensuring that the manufacturing of contemporary consumer culture runs smoothly and efficiently. And the film captures the humanity present in such environments that we tend to forget, and the human desire for personal expression and creative existence. Adjacent to this piece is a sculpture, Optimization of Parenting, Part 2 by Adi Wagenknecht, where a robotic arm is programmed to gently rock a baby crib. Wagenknecht suggests that some parenting tasks are tedious and could be modified without affecting the development of the baby. She claims that in order to, quote, make it an option for all women to have both their creative work and children, we must optimize the process of parenting, unquote. Robotic arms are widespread in industrial manufacturing, and subverting their application to automate childcare is a provocative gesture, which I see as an extension of historical feminist discussions about whether or not household technologies have served as a liberator to women. Technology can be used to reinforce existing values or to challenge them, as we all know. Right. So, I'm sorry, lost my position here. So what role should technology and automation have in child rearing? As a generation of children grow up nannied by screens, what values will they have learnt and developed through embodied experience, and how will that affect humanity's future? The positive responses to the Oculus Rift, the first affordable virtual reality headset, points to a future where real and virtual worlds converge dramatically. Originally intended for gaming purposes, the technology will inevitably be used in surprising and unexpected ways. Already being applied in the creation of artworks and immersive theater, the sex industry was also quick to take advantage of virtual reality's potential. It's interesting to consider how this technology might impact human attitudes towards gender and sexuality. Within Human Plus, the artwork Machine to Be Another is an interactive installation that enables visitors to virtually experience having a different body, male, female, old, or young. Using the Oculus Rift, visitors explore their sense of self through the embodiment of another. As a research-driven project, the artists are collaborating with neuroscientists and psychologists to explore concepts of identity, a sense of self, and empathy. Now I'll give you a moment to pause and enjoy the images that photographer Yves Joly took at different humanoid robotic labs around the world. His approach is to document what he sees and let you be the judge. That's in Germany. So, when considering the future of our species, it's not only about our minds and our bodies, but the context in which we live. Humans cannot exist in isolation, but are reliant on complex, interwoven, and messy ecosystems that support life on Earth. Authoring environments acknowledges that humans have always been manipulated by their surroundings, whether consciously or not. So one question or provocation is, can we author environments we inhabit more thoughtfully? The future of our species relies on maintaining these environments, natural and built, that sustain us, so yeah. The Center for Post-Natural History is an artist-initiated museum that collects, catalogues, and interprets biological specimens that have been manipulated and modified by humans. Mimicking the presentation methods of a natural history museum, their collection of specimens from lab rats to genetically modified mosquitoes uncover just how vast human preferences and values have impacted other species and the biodiversity of the planet. So here, for example, you can see an alcoholic rat that was bred to be alcoholic by Finnish researchers. It's also trying to address a gap in this cultural history where natural history museums don't collect these things. They don't know, there's no place for them. So here we see two projects that were side by side in the exhibition: Foragers by Dunn and Raby and Eat the Sun by DIY Bio Barcelona. They both explore very speculative scenarios about how we might find new ways of receiving energy by using different tools. Foragers tells its story through highly refined objects, images, and videos. It's a speculative project that draws from a variety of current fringe activities, from urban foraging to DIY bio, and suggests that people might create tools to make available currently indigestible biological matter, such as algae. DIY Bio Barcelona takes a very different approach, very hands-on, exploring speculative and probably impossible idea of humans being able to photosynthesize. Citing the biology of the sea snail Elysia chlorotica as inspiration, which retains the chloroplasts of the algae that it eats. So they try to understand speculative ideas or engage with them using DIY bio tools. The start and end points of life on the planet Earth are known. If there's birth, eventually there will be death. The project within life at the edges focuses on shifting definitions and the increasingly fuzzy edges of birth and death and our endless fascination with these topics. Grappling with our mortality is one of the defining factors that make us human. We know we have a limited time, and we spend some part of our life wondering what we leave behind and how or if we will be remembered at all. For many humans, reproduction and seeing themselves and their children is one way of continuing their own story after they're gone, but even that story is growing ever more complicated. Transfigurations by Agatha Haynes is a series of sculptures of infants with invasive body modifications that supposedly enhance the child's chances of a successful life. They elicit a visceral reaction and, for me, raise ethical questions around medical and parental ambitions and our ability to consider unexpected consequences. Humans are complex and contradictory and inevitably do unexpected things with technology, and by offering cautionary or celebratory tales of potential futures, this method of creative practice can be seen as a contemporary form of mythology creation, where the moral of the story is left open for the visitors to discuss and decide. So this was not an artwork, but an example of a performing research in the gallery, where visitors were invited to participate in a study by neuroscientists on the promise that virtual reality manages to deceive your brain and play with perception. Important lines, this is taken from the neuroscientists, important lines of psychological, sociological, and therapeutic investigation are being opened. So in this investigation, participants could experience an entire life compressed into a few minutes on an island while interacting with other participants, and the Event Lab research group were conducting a scientific study on perception and empathy and experiences of end of life. The semi-living worry dolls were the first tissue-engineered sculptures to be presented live in a gallery in 2000, and we showed documentation of this exhibit. Tissue engineering is the process of using living cells to manufacture connective tissues and potentially even organs within a lab environment. The Tissue Culture and Art Project was set up to explore questions arising from the use of living tissues to create or grow semi-living objects, as Oren and Jonat call it, and to research and critically consider the technologies involved in such a task. They also found the first bioart lab called Symbiotica. Neither alive or dead, the semi-living worry dolls challenge our concept of life, consisting of animal cells sustained by a life support machine. And finally, the Euthanasia Coaster by Julianos Urbanos prototypes voluntary death by roller coaster. Although the G-forces at play make the proposal possible, the social question of individual choice around death and the artist's use of humor are what make this piece so provocative. Although taking one's own life is considered shameful or sinful in many cultures, new human life scales may require new end-of-life rituals. When it comes to choice and the technologies we use, this piece raises the stakes to the ultimate personal choice we have. Would you rather live your last months incapacitated in a hospital with a life support machine, or end things swiftly in a thrilling ride? Should this choice be yours to make? So, as Marshall McLuhan wrote, that the most human thing about us is our technology. With the straightforward poetry, he captured the tension, which has been repeated multiple times yesterday, in humankind's relationship to technology. They're extensions of ourselves, increasing our capabilities while also increasing our anxieties by destabilizing our conception of what it means to be human, existing and acting in the world. So technological change is perhaps inevitable, but change alone does not imply progress or improvement, as many thinkers have argued. And I think, Human Plus demonstrates many paths to the future, which is perhaps more of a journey than anything else. The plus implies a value judgment that we will need to make individually and collectively about our technologies, our place in the world, and ultimately what it is to be human. And I think artworks can help us to think through these decisions by providing tangible agitprops, artifacts, and visualizations that help us imagine the possibilities. Thank you.
So, thank you guys. I noticed there was some kind of shared motive of all of your three talks, actually. So there was this development from animal breeding to eugenics to human optimizing in science fiction, and the reflection of human optimizing in art, and the topic of optimizing in the near future. So affects become, this was very interesting, affects become optimizable. This was very clear. And also this topic, you mentioned it in this, I think Greg Eden stuff, this suicide is still an anthropological topic, and still one could think this could be some kind of an existentialistic picture he painted. No, it's this kind of, Camus said, the pure human thought of suicide is this point we all have to talk about.
Yeah, it's very interesting because of the fact that literature creates these effects. You have a figure and you have the effects of the figure, and that's very interesting about science fiction literature and art in general, to create these effects, these percepts, for example. I think art is one way, a special way, to show the people how to act together with machines, how it feels like when you are in virtual reality. It feels like when you are software entity. You act with machines, war machines. That's my opinion.
Yeah, Stan can start. If you want to, you can start. No, yeah. I'm just still thinking, because what I think what is important, and it's a little bit what our research is from Felix and my perspective. What we just not presenting here, but is that it's very important that we divide this, something what we heard yesterday about the machine term. We must divide two different types of terms, transhumanism, posthumanism. So this is totally important, because often we hear about some kinds of transhumanism and posthumanism, but what they mean is like some kind of anti-humanism, post-structural discourse like Rosi Braidotti or Foucault. This is something properly, I would say, totally different than the things we saw here. So the prothetics, this upload, this science fiction idea that I can upload my mind and my brain. So these are two different kinds for speaking about transhumanism and posthumanism. I think this is what I found very impressive and important also in this talk.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's one is critical and the other isn't.
Exactly, yeah.
So one is just techno-utopian optimism, and the other one is like, let's think about this a little bit. So
It's actually not only optimism. No? We have to keep in mind that this transhumanism is a totally libertarian capitalistic structure. Mm-hmm. Ray Kurzweil is working for Google, and it's, for example, this transhumanism optimizing is libertarian, is capitalistic, and this posthuman thinking. You also have to divide posthuman and posthumanism. Yeah. Posthumanism means behind this ideology of humanism, and posthuman is some kind like that was I was showing, thinking of extinction of what is human.
Just really one sentence to this. I would totally agree to you. And you saw this divided term in this popular term, which also came up often in this conference, is the cyborg term. So there we have this one techno-euphoric term, which also comes from this medicine view from Klein and Klein from 1960s, which was the idea of astronautic and to optimize the astronaut. And the other one is like from Don Haraway, we all know this term, which is also, this would lead also to your, it's a kind of writing cyborg. So it's not only prosthetics or to combine with a machine, it's also a different style of writing against power structures and some things.
Yes, I will say the literature and the art, for example, has both sides. In cyberpunk, you have the subversive side on one hand. You have the dark side of the media, the dark side of technology, and I think in art it's the same. You find the dark side of technology and also the bright side of life, of cyborgs and war machines, also the dark side. And, it's literature, it's an aesthetic program. It's art, it's an aesthetic program. It dances around, like Greg Pierce said, with science, but also it's only literature. And you have to take it as seismograph, as an aesthetic moment to think about identity, what will be in the future, and not as that's possible and now it's possible and it's the dark side and we haven't got to have oder cannot diese Technik benutzen, also the Technik or what we can do, making, and so on.
Trying to subvert this potential capitalist techno structures to make it subversive, to make it libertarian again.
The literature shows what Hurst said, environmentality, and the art shows the same on one side.
I was wondering, kind of a question. So it's very, I feel like in literature and in art, it's often dystopias that are presented. And do you think that's because utopias are a lot harder to imagine, or because they're just boring? I don't know if there's a...
It's a good question. It's a very good question. Well, I was the pessimistic guy of all of us, so... well, it's trying to be a constructive pessimist is the approach to it. But yeah, exactly. I think you're right. Pessimistic structures to design pessimistic structures to design the greatest catastrophe. But I think this is the point how we can learn the most for our future. Like Paul Virilio said, in the accident, actually in the catastrophe, in the accident, we learn what's the normal case.
One thing I would totally agree to you. Utopia is just borrowing. Literature, to speak with Niklas Luhmann, system theory, have to produce produce communication and not. And there was the line about borrowing literature, and it was interesting literature. And literature must be interesting to out-poet his own communication. So I think it's like also in this romance of the 19th century, you have borrowing good, well-working families, nobody will buy.
This is exactly the point why I choose horror. Oh yeah, I exactly. Thank you. We should open up the discussion for the audience. If someone wants to someone has a question. Join us. So just let me finish first. That's why I choose horror, because to choose horror, that's the point. What's frightened us? What is our fears or our unconscious? Is the trigger I can reach you. You can reach human to think about these catastrophes.
Can I just add to that? Because I'm intrigued by this, because there is a rapid sort of succession of previously horrifying, terrifying, awful moments that have been depicted through fiction, which are absolutely we are beyond. In terms of surveillance, for one example, just randomly picked, the surveillance technologies that we are now very much a part of our everyday lives weren't even possible to imagine back when George Orwell was writing whatever. But so I'm wondering what this sort of talking specifically on what you're just talking about is more of a curiosity of I don't know what the question is, but there's something about the way in which this is turning over so quickly, the anticipation of the worst possible scenario. We've almost gone past that before it's even happened. There's a sort of, I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm ruminating.
Yeah, maybe what I'm trying to ask or say adds to that. It's strange when I saw the disabilities being helped, like with these prosthetics and stuff, yeah? So I was wondering, you said there is a bigger acceptance for disabled people like this in society, and on the other side, there is, we can see that the critical gets rejected, the people can't stand the other anymore, yeah? More and more the politics get more right-winged. We see this a lot in Germany with the refugees at the moment, so people can't stand an image which is different from the idea of an image they have, a perfect image, the selfie image, whatever, yeah? So I'm wondering why, and this leads to what you say, because surveillance is also part of this kind of perfect world idea. So what I'm wondering about is, why is that the case? If we have the idea that people with disabilities get more included into society, this seems to be a more sort of social or left-wing idea. than, on the other hand, having an elitist idea. So why is that not working? Why does it not seem to be working that an idea of an enhancement of humanity can be connected to more left-wing ideas or politics? This is my question.
I think it definitely can be. There is a potential there for it to be, and I think there are glimpses of that in, for example, Amy Mullins or Neil Harbison or other media artists who are experimenting kind of very much at the fringes of what's socially acceptable. But I think there's a risk of it being very quickly co-opted by mainstream practices and then just not being thought of as critical or critically. But I think, we also showed a film in the exhibition called Nobody's Perfect by a German filmmaker. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Anyway, and he could use prosthetics but chooses not to, and talks about wanting a greater acceptance of all kinds of ways of being. And I think we're definitely not there yet. But there, some projects point to more interesting ways of accepting. And I think technology has the potential to possibly create a wider acceptance.
So because I think we had to speak about two kinds of enhancement. We have this medical enhancement, which just heals something, like a prosthesis, but this is a different kind because it heals your leg, but it also can make you faster. So, but in the other kind, and the other kind of enhancement by optimization, this is a kind of enhancement which has this capitalist economic view, because what I showed is like a collective idea of eugenics. But after the Second World War, not so nicht überraschend. Not surprising that after the Second World War, this idea of Rassenhygiene and eugenics, this doesn't work. But we have this idea of eugenics and optimization biopolitics by the individual. So you are your self-manager, you have to be great, but when you do wrong, it's your fault, so nobody else. And so this kind of enhancement, there is an economic view of a self-manager, but okay, the borders are blowing. You have this pathetic man who doesn't have legs, and he is faster with this prosthetic. So it's healing and pathetic. But I would say we have to divide two kinds, and the second kind, like I say again, is very economic and very like capitalism idea of enhancement.
I think it's not only this idea of control, it's not only this idea of enhancement, it's also an idea of control. Very early on after the Second World War, it's something like Andreas showed us yesterday and Erich showed us on Friday. It's this motive of regulation and control in the cybernetics and in the cybernetization structure that is a concept of government. It's also governmentality and not only enhancement as well. So this is a huge bunch of problems, actually. So there are actually some questions.
First of all, thank you to the panelists for great presentations and for teaching us that we need museums of unnatural histories and nature cultural histories. Felix, you mentioned the techno scene, and you mentioned Erich's not liking Anthropocene as a concept. And in academic discourse, we are very often looking for our right concept to put against the others, which we find is so much better. And in politics, of course, Carl Schmitt has always made the argument, we need to win that struggle for the concept, and But there is something Donna Haraway recently in a talk she gave reminded us of, is that, however, once these concepts, even though she too does not like the concept Anthropocene, even though a concept like Anthropocene is in the world, once it is in the world, it does work. right? And the work it does is something I'm very interested in, because as much as you and your projects try to move towards your concepts or look at the artists and how they move towards certain concepts, they still have to, or still their work is influenced, and your work is influenced by the work that concepts do that you try to escape from, and they are often very hidden. And I'm really interested mostly in Felix and Kat, where you see these kinds of things happening in your work, the very concepts that do work that you do not see and don't want to see. Thank you.
So you're asking what we are influenced by? Escaping from, okay. Actually, I'm escaping from hermeneutics and escaping from this earlier phenomenological approach. I try to, and not only try to deny the strong subject as the center of our thinking and the center of our acting. It's not this subject is using an object, is using an instrument. This is something I want to shut down and no longer think about it. I want to think about assemblages. I want to think about actor networks. I want to try this low anti-hierarchy sort of theory. So this is my approach. And and I also, this is exactly the same point why I choose not to use Anthropocene. Of course it's in the world, and of course it's very influential actually. But that's the point why I use Technocene, because it's giving human too much credit, and because of this, in an unconscious way, the subject comes back, I think.
I don't have an issue with Anthropocene. I find it a very useful term, and it's not that it's. I don't think its purpose is to make us just think about ourselves, but it's actually make us think critically about our place in the world, and the fact that it shouldn't be human-centric. So that's one. I find this useful. And then, what am I running away from? I guess on a very simple, non-theoretical thing, I'm running away from design education that's telling you that you should work for a company and produce images that sell products from in a very basic explanation. But yeah, I think there's obviously Human Plus is built on the shoulders of many, many, many thinkers, and yeah, I'm not actually sure what I'm running away from.
Hi, thank you to all the speakers. That was really actually been an amazing panel and very diverse and incredible. The question I have is more so for Kevin, right? There was. Thank you for your presentation on eugenics. It's very interesting, and I think to find very interesting when we deal with life philosophies and especially vitalisms and so on and so forth. The sort of question I have for you is when we consider things such as eugenics, it's very difficult to divorce these sort of philosophical origins of, or even the epistemological origins of eugenics from the social consequences of eugenics. And it's a very natural progression from development of sort of interspecies potentiality, you could say, of optimizing certain interspecies, but that's so easily flowed into an intraspecies categorization. And that's been a long-running effect of eugenics. So going from necessarily, I mean, your focus was on human and animal, which was sort of the precursor to a focus on the categorization of human and human, which your presentation didn't really touch on much. You mentioned a post-colonial stance sort of in passing, but didn't necessarily speak on the long-running consequences or sort of the evolutionary step of eugenics, which is well known. I guess the first question is, was it intentional to sort of not really address the very essential part of vitalist philosophies that taps into a post-colonial or even sort of a Western framework of what eugenics actually encompasses in its cultural optimization? And secondly, I'm curious about your thoughts of your position of eugenics as a historicity, when in fact, actually, there's a very small but growing body of research that is challenging the idea that eugenics is actually still present, and it's present within the new tools that we have available, because sort of vitalist and life philosophies are making a new emergence underneath the optimization of deep mining and data analytics, which seems objective, but is in fact a new emergence of a vitalist type of philosophy. And when you actually compare that to the emergence of eugenics, both in the East and West, that same concept, the new scientific capabilities at the time were used as an objective stance to categorize race and culture. So if I actually compare both of those time periods together, the optimization that you speak of that's new now is not actually new. It's been a long emergence, hundreds of years of attempts at cultural optimization that's gone everywhere from infrastructure to social systems to individuals. And now we've sort of reached a new amplification, as you say, into sort of a biopolitical framework where that optimization it works on parallel functions now in categorizing groups of people, as well as categorizing the individual and dissecting that individual into different sort of scalings and rankings. So I guess in the interest of thinking about things such as machine ethics and thinking about things as social categorization, so on and so forth, in relation to social policies, I'm curious on how you see eugenics now, not just as an experimentation between the tension between man and animal. I feel eugenics is way past that point. I'm just curious on how you see that progression, and then was it sort of intentional not to address the sort of long-running consequences of eugenics?
Okay, thanks for your great and very deep question. I try to answer some of your points. I think what I want in my talk is like to show just a little bit. It was like let's say 10 years of Russian eugenics and just 3 authors, because what you can do with 20 minutes or 50 minutes of time. But I think the first thing what you said, I would totally agree to you that in some way the eugenics now, eugenic ideas come back. But what the Russian did is not so strong. I think in this time it's another kind of eugenics. It's not. It's like this. What they want push away from themselves. It's not a kind of Western eugenics. It's not a kind of race eugenics. So when they say eugenics, they mean the most time optimization. And we speak until now. I speak about the 1920s and 30s, or more about the 1920s. They mean optimization of man, and this is like whole man. That's not like they don't divide race, because the problem is Russia is a very big and far country, and they have so many like races in this country that they don't divide like the Germans did, because the Germans eugenics, and the Germans doesn't use this term so often, in the 1930s and in the Nazi regime, come from a more medical way. Like it was founded in the end of 1900 by Alfred Plötz, and it also in the German term of eugenics you have even more the word hygiene. Is this the same in English? Yeah, hygiene. And this is not the kind of this idea of the Russian term. But you're right. But I think when you said, okay, this optimization idea, when I understand you right, it has a long tradition, and it's nothing new to optimization. And eugenics is also nothing new. Did I understand you right this way? So,
well, I'm not so much concerned. I mean, it's well known that eugenics in different particular areas function in different ways. I mean, English eugenics is very different than German eugenics is very different than a Russian eugenics, and so on and so forth. So my concern isn't the nuances of eugenics. My concern is the logics underneath eugenics, because that's the commonality between them. So whether that optimization was articulated in a different way is not really my concern. My concern is the pervasiveness of the logics of optimization itself and how that has consequences for the categorization of people. So I'm just curious of why you're not addressing the categorization part.
The categorization of what are the thoughts below eugenics. So, yeah, but this
what makes a person have a passion for life, love, and work? How do you define that?
Within the life philosophies, as you're saying, like these sort of the old terms have sort of flown away. Yeah. But there's a new emergence of different types of categorization. So we see through data analytics, happiness studies that are now ranking again cultures. You have race studies that are now ranking intelligence. And under the terms of optimization, you have these sort of different elements, and then the political and social consequences of that lean back to your research about interbreeding of social mechanisms to optimize what's seen as a cultural fault. And I guess that's what I'm curious about, is your thoughts on those.
Okay. I will try it. If I can't answer it totally, probably we can speak after this talk a little more. But just few questions. A few answers. The question were enough. I think when we think about the logic of eugenics and the different ideas behind eugenics, then we have to separate, like you said, different ideas and different, sometimes totally different ideas of eugenics. So if you just say optimization, this is, I think this is too big. So this is okay. First time, this is of course nothing new, but I would say it is not something new. But when you say eugenics comes back now, it comes back with a probably same ideas, but it comes back with a different technology. And like I said in my lecture, the idea of a eugenics as a collective thing for a whole wave, in German or sometimes somehow also in Soviet Union, is something which after the Second World War, I don't know exactly how it is today. I'm like an historian, I'm running away from modern questions. But after the Second World War, it's totally different. Even the French anthropologists tried to did this with the term anthropotechniques, but they see in the consequences of the publicity that it doesn't work. It doesn't work in this time because it was too hard after the Second World War. But probably I haven't satisfied you from here, so probably we can speak a little bit more about this later, because I'm looking forward.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess the final challenge, what I'm trying to say, is those on the other end of eugenics never had the luxury of delineating types of eugenics. The effects on them was neutral. So if I'm dealing with a colonial, like if I'm dealing with sort of a West African colonial property, it's not like they're saying distinguishing between, okay, that's Dutch eugenics and you in Zimbabwe are British eugenics. There's no distinguishing on that level of culture. So I guess that's the challenge is from what framework in which are you looking for eugenics and actually taking the position of luxury of being able to delineate what you address in this big conflated issue.
Thanks.
Should we close or should we have? So, okay, we have to close our panel. Thank you, you all three, and thank you, Fabian, again, and let's share a coffee and discuss it.